Suddenly, the peace shatters. Engines roar from the sky, a mechanical swarm screaming out of the rising sun. The first bombs fall, erupting into thunder and flame. Battleships shake as men are thrown from their bunks, alarms wailing through the harbor. Smoke boils into the sky. On the deck of the USS West Virginia, chaos reigns. The ship is struck once, twice, 3 times, explosions ripping holes through her hull. Among the rushing sailors is a tall, broad-shouldered man in a white apron, a mess attendant, one of the lowest ranks in the U.S. Navy. His name is Doris Miller. He isn't a gunner. He isn't a trained soldier. He serves meals, carries laundry, and cleans officers' quarters. But on that morning, when death rained from the sky, he would do something no one expected. As machine gun fire rips through the air, Miller rushes toward a twin, .50 caliber anti-aircraft gun. The gunner lies dead beside it. Without hesitation, Miller grabs the handles, steadies his aim, and begins to fire. Tracer rounds streak upward, cutting through the smoke. One Japanese bomber bursts into flame, spiraling into the harbor. Another follows. For the first time in history, America saw a black sailor not as a servant, but as a hero. On December 7th, 1941, the narrator's voice hardens. When the world seemed to crumble, one man stood tall and proved that courage has no color. Before that fateful morning, Doris Miller was nearly invisible, one of thousands of young black men who wore the uniform, but were never allowed to truly serve. Born in Waco, Texas, in 1919, Doris was the son of sharecroppers, raised under the weight of Jim Crow laws and Southern segregation. Life was hard, but not hopeless. Doris was known in his small community for his quiet strength and broad grin. At 6 feet 3 inches tall and powerfully built, he was a natural athlete, strong, fast, and disciplined. But in 1939, with few opportunities available for a young black man in Texas, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy. He hoped to send money home to his family and see the world beyond the cotton fields. What he found instead was another kind of barrier. The Navy of the late 1932nd was still deeply segregated. Black sailors could only serve in service ratings: cooks, stewards, mess attendants. They cleaned, cooked, and served officers, but were forbidden to handle weapons or receive combat training. It was a system built on prejudice, one that measured worth by skin color instead of courage. When Doris reported for duty, he was assigned to the USS West Virginia, a battleship moored in Pearl Harbor. His job was simple: serve meals, make beds, and scrub decks. To the Navy, he was just Mess Attendant 3rd Class Miller. Yet beneath that humble title was a man with the heart of a warrior. Doris quickly gained respect among the crew. He was strong enough to carry 2 200-pound sacks of potatoes at once, a feat that earned him the nickname Heavyweight. On weekends, he boxed for the ship's team, using his towering frame and quick reflexes to earn several victories. He wasn't loud or boastful, but the men noticed. One shipmate later said, "When Dory walked into a room, you knew he was there, not because he spoke, but because you could feel his presence." Still, for all his strength and discipline, the Navy saw him as just another servant. He could pour coffee for officers but not carry a rifle beside them. In 1941, tensions in the Pacific were escalating. Japan's empire stretched across Asia, and relations with the United States were deteriorating rapidly. American ships gathered in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, the Pacific Fleet's beating heart. But for men like Doris Miller, war felt distant. He continued his daily duties aboard the West Virginia, cleaning, serving, smiling through the monotony. The world above him, of admirals and politics, seemed far away. Then came December 7th. That morning began like any other. The air was warm and humid, the scent of salt mixed with diesel. Miller rose early to collect laundry. Below decks, sailors joked about breakfast, sports, and letters from home. Then, at 7:55 a.m., the first explosions rocked the harbor. Miller was below deck when the ship lurched violently, throwing him against a wall. The lights flickered, alarms blared. He rushed to his station, but orders were chaotic. Another explosion tore through the hull, and water began flooding the lower compartments. Men screamed for help. The West Virginia was hit by multiple torpedoes, listing heavily to port. Doris didn't hesitate. He began pulling wounded men out of the smoke, carrying them to safety. Then he heard the call, "No one forgets." All hands to battle stations. Though he had no combat post, Miller ran toward the topside, toward the fire, the chaos, the storm. He was about to step into history. At 7:48 a.m., Japanese torpedo bombers broke through the morning clouds, sunlight glinting off the red circles painted on their wings. Moments later, the world exploded. A wall of noise tore across Pearl Harbor. Torpedoes slammed into battleships moored along Battleship Row. Within seconds, oil and water erupted into the air, raining fire. The USS West Virginia shuddered under the first hit, then a second, then a third. Each impact shook the decks like an earthquake. Bulkheads split, lights went out. Water roared in from the port side. Below deck, Mess Attendant Third Class Doris Miller braced himself against the wall as the floor tilted beneath his feet. The smell of burning oil filled the corridors. Someone shouted, "Torpedo hit! We're taking on water!" Miller didn't wait for orders. He ran toward the upper decks, pushing through smoke and steam, helping the wounded as he went. He reached the ship's anti-aircraft platform. The air was thick with smoke. Shrapnel whizzed past like angry bees. The deck was slick with blood and seawater. Above, Japanese dive bombers screamed down almost vertically, releasing bombs that exploded with deafening concussions. Miller saw Captain Mervyn Bennion, the ship's commanding officer, struck by shrapnel from a nearby blast. Bleeding heavily, the captain refused to leave his post. Doris and two others dragged him out of the open air, shielding him from further fire. Then another explosion threw them all to the deck. The West Virginia was dying, burning, listing, yet refusing to sink. As smoke rolled over the battleship, Miller looked for any way to help. The gunners on one of the Browning 50 calories anti-aircraft guns had been killed or knocked unconscious. The weapon twin barrels glinting in the flames sat unmanned. He had never been trained to use one. Regulations forbade him from even touching a firearm. But in that moment, rules meant nothing. He climbed behind the gun, his massive hands gripping the cold metal handles. "How do you fire this thing?" he shouted to a nearby sailor. The man yelled back, "Just keep it pointed at those planes." Miller squeezed the triggers. The gun thundered to life, a pounding rhythm of defiance. Tracer rounds streaked through the smoke, slashing across the sky. He adjusted his aim, tracking a diving bomber. The plane burst into flame, spiraling toward the sea. Miller swung the barrels to another, firing in controlled bursts. Witnesses later swore they saw 2, maybe 3 enemy aircraft fall under his fire. No one could say for sure the chaos was absolute, but one thing was certain. Doris Miller, a cook from Waco, Texas, was fighting back. For 15 minutes he fired, unmoving, sweat and oil mixing on his skin. Empty cartridges piled around his feet. his hands blistered from the heat of the grips. Each time the gun bucked, the entire mount rattled against the deck. Sailors around him shouted encouragement, feeding ammunition, calling out targets. The once servant had become their gunner. Above them, the sky burned orange. Ships exploded one after another, the Arizona, the Oklahoma, the California, entire crews trapped inside steel coffins. The harbor was hell itself. Yet amid that inferno, Miller's gun kept barking back. When his ammunition finally ran dry, he climbed down, smoke-stained and trembling. But he wasn't done. He went below deck again, helping to pull more wounded sailors out of flooded compartments. By the time the attack ended, over 2,400 Americans were dead. The USS West Virginia lay half-submerged, flames licking her sides, and somewhere among the wreckage stood a man who, hours earlier, had only been allowed to serve coffee. Now, he had served his country in the truest sense, with courage. When the smoke cleared, Pearl Harbor looked like a graveyard. Ships lay broken and burning. Oil slicks stretched across the water, shimmering in rainbow colors under a black sky. In the aftermath, survivors worked tirelessly to save whoever they could. Doris Miller was among them. He hauled sailors onto lifeboats, carried stretchers, and dove into oil-covered water to pull men to safety. He was exhausted, his uniform torn and burned, but he refused to stop. Hours later, as rescue crews took over, Miller was finally ordered to rest. He collapsed on the deck, his massive frame covered in grime and soot. He didn't think of himself as a hero, only as someone who did what had to be done. For weeks after the attack, chaos and grief consumed the Navy. Lists of the dead and missing filled telegrams across America. Among those still living, countless stories of bravery began to circulate, but few had names attached. Then rumors spread. A black sailor had manned an anti-aircraft gun and shot down enemy planes. At first, officers dismissed it as an exaggeration. After all, how could a mess attendant, a man forbidden from using weapons, have done such a thing? But survivors of the West Virginia backed the story. They gave his name, Doris Miller. By January 1942, newspapers across the country picked up the tale. Headlines read, "Negro Messman Fights Back at Pearl Harbor." For many white Americans, it was the first time they had seen the words Negro and hero in the same sentence. Across the country, African American communities rejoiced. Churches held special services. Young men enlisted, inspired by Miller's courage. In Washington, however, the Navy hesitated. Racial prejudice ran deep. Many senior officers feared publicly celebrating a black man as a national hero. But the pressure was relentless from the press, from civil rights groups, from ordinary Americans who wanted justice done. Finally, the Navy relented. On May 27, 1942, aboard the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, Admiral Chester Nimitz personally pinned the Navy Cross on Doris Miller's chest, the second highest decoration for valor. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled notes. Standing at attention, his uniform crisp and clean, Miller listened as Nimitz declared, "This marks the first time in this conflict that such high tribute has been made to a member of his race. He fought gallantly, and he has earned it." The crowd erupted in applause. But Miller, humble as ever, simply said, "I just did what I had to do." He never bragged, never sought fame. When asked how many planes he thought he'd shot down, he shrugged. It wasn't the time to count. To him, heroism wasn't about race or recognition, it was about duty. Still, his story rippled far beyond the decks of the West Virginia. In a nation where segregation was still law, Doris Miller became a living contradiction, proof that valor and color had nothing to do with each other. Newspapers printed his photograph. Posters declared him a symbol of American courage. For many, he embodied the hope that perhaps this war, this global struggle for freedom, might finally bring equality at home. But even as his legend grew, the Navy remained slow to change. Black sailors were still confined to service roles. Miller, despite his fame, continued as a mess attendant. Yet everywhere he went, men saluted him with newfound respect. When he walked through a crowd, heads turned. He had become, as one journalist put it, the face of quiet defiance, the man who fought for a country that barely saw him. But behind the fame was a man who never sought it. After the ceremony aboard the USS Enterprise, Doris Miller returned quietly to duty. The medal on his chest gleamed, but he still reported to the same job, polishing silverware, cleaning tables, serving coffee to officers. To him, nothing had changed. He still rose at dawn, still answered, "Yes, sir," and still carried the same humility that had defined him since Waco. But outside the Navy, America was changing, at least for a moment. The photograph of Miller receiving the Navy Cross was printed in newspapers from coast to coast. To millions of Black Americans, it was more than a story, it was a revelation. For the first time, the nation had seen a man of color honored not for entertainment, not for labor, but for valor. Churches in Harlem and Chicago held services in his name. School children memorized his story. In a world torn apart by fascism abroad and racism at home, Doris Miller became a symbol, a living proof that courage had no boundaries of color. In Washington, civil rights leaders seized the moment. They wrote letters to Congress demanding equal opportunities for Black servicemen. The Pittsburgh Courier, a leading African-American newspaper, launched the Double V campaign, victory abroad against fascism and victory at home against racism. At the center of their message stood one man, Doris Miller. But fame was a strange burden. When Miller walked through port cities in uniform, people recognized him. They wanted photographs, handshakes, even autographs. Some called him the Jackie Robinson of the Navy, long before Jackie Robinson would ever step onto a baseball field. Yet, others, especially within the military, saw him as a threat to the old order. Some officers quietly dismissed his heroism as luck. Others claimed the reports were exaggerated, that a messman couldn't possibly know how to fire a .50 caliber. Miller never argued. He simply smiled, saluted, and carried on. To those who knew him, that humility was what made his courage shine even brighter. He never let the medal go to his head, one shipmate later recalled. He just said, "I did what any man would have done if he'd been there." Still, the world around him was shifting. The U.S. Navy began to reevaluate its segregation policies slowly, cautiously. In 1942 and 1943, new training programs opened for Black sailors, allowing them to serve as gunners, machinists, and engineers for the first time. It was a small step toward the future one Miller had unknowingly helped create. Meanwhile, his own journey continued. After his time aboard the Enterprise, Miller was reassigned to the newly commissioned escort carrier USS Liscum Bay in 1943. The ship was part of the Pacific Fleet preparing for operations in the Gilbert Islands, a series of brutal amphibious invasions designed to push Japan back across the Pacific. Before departure, Miller was invited to several war bond tours on the mainland. He met politicians, appeared at rallies, and spoke at schools. but the spotlight never sat comfortably on his shoulders. In interviews, he was polite but brief. When asked about his bravery, he deflected. "There were other men doing their duty, same as me," he said. "I just happened to be where I was needed." To him, the real heroes were those who didn't come home from Pearl Harbor. Still, his quiet dignity inspired millions. To young black men across the country, his story whispered a simple but radical truth: you belong. By late 1943, Miller was ready to return to sea. Though offered the chance to stay stateside, he refused. He wanted to serve again, not as a symbol, but as a sailor. On November 24, 1943, the USS Liscum Bay joined Task Group 52.3 off the coast of Makin Atoll. The ship carried over 900 crewmen, preparing air support for Marine landings. The atmosphere on board was tense but hopeful. The Allies had begun turning the tide. Pearl Harbor, though scarred, was no longer a symbol of defeat. It was a rallying cry. That night, Doris wrote a letter home. He told his mother he was fine, that the war was going well, and that he hoped to visit home soon. He signed it the same way he always did: "Your son, Doris." It would be the last letter he ever wrote. By the end of 1943, America had changed beyond recognition from the world Miller was born into. Factories that once refused to hire black workers now ran 24 hours a day with integrated crews. Millions of African Americans had joined the armed forces, but full equality was still a dream. Even as Doris Miller stood as a national hero, the Navy remained segregated. African American sailors slept in separate quarters, ate at separate messes, and were rarely promoted beyond petty officer. Yet, the Navy couldn't erase what had happened at Pearl Harbor. They couldn't erase the image of a man who, on the darkest day in American history, had stood his ground when so many others fell. And for all the speeches and ceremonies, Doris Miller himself remained the same: grounded, humble, quietly proud. "He carried the Navy Cross like it was made of paper," said one survivor. "It never changed him. He didn't see himself as the first of anything. He didn't call himself a hero. He just did his job, and did it better than anyone expected." But destiny wasn't finished with him yet. Night falls over the Gilberts. The USS Liscum Bay moves silently through calm water. No one aboard knows that beneath them, a Japanese submarine, the I-175, stalks the task group. The next dawn would bring fire once again. For a few fleeting hours, it felt like peace. The Marines had taken Makin Atoll. The Japanese resistance was fading. On deck, sailors laughed, brewed coffee, and talked about going home. Doris Miller was among them, taller than most, broad-shouldered, his uniform immaculate as always. He had earned respect among his crew. To the young sailors, Dory wasn't just the mess attendant anymore. He was the man who had faced death once and didn't flinch. But as the sun rose on the 24th of November 1943, fate crept closer beneath the waves. Hidden in the shadows, 130 feet below, the Japanese submarine I-175 prepared its attack. The submarine's commander, Lieutenant Commander Sunao Tabata, had been stalking the task group since nightfall. Now, through his periscope, he saw the silhouette of an escort carrier, a perfect target. He gave the order. Fire torpedoes spread, 2 fish. The first missed. The second did not. At 5:33 hours, a single Type 95 torpedo struck the starboard side of the Liscum Bay, hitting the ship's bomb magazine, the very heart of her ammunition storage. What followed wasn't an explosion. It was annihilation. In a fraction of a second, the carrier's center erupted in a white-hot inferno. The blast ripped through steel decks, igniting torpedo warheads, 500-pound bombs, and aviation fuel. A column of fire shot hundreds of feet into the air. Men on nearby ships said the explosion looked like the sun had risen twice. Pieces of the Liscum Bay, chunks of steel, aircraft wings, human lives rained down across the sea. Within 23 minutes, the ship that had carried nearly 900 men was gone. Survivors later recalled seeing Doris Miller helping to carry wounded men toward lifeboats after the explosion. He didn't panic. He didn't run. He was last seen near the deck, trying to help another sailor reach the rail. Then, in the chaos, the ship vanished beneath the waves. Out of 916 crewmen aboard, only 272 survived. Among the lost was Petty Officer Second Class Doris Miller. He was 24 years old. No one knows exactly how he died. Some say he was blown overboard by the blast. Others that he went down helping another man escape. But those who knew him had no doubt what kind of man he was in those final moments. If there was a man who stayed behind to help, it was Dory, one survivor said. For weeks, his family waited in Waco for a telegram that never came. Then, one cold January morning, it arrived. The Navy Department regrets to inform you, news of Miller's death made headlines. But as the war raged on, the world moved fast. Heroes came and went. Battles shifted to Saipan, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. For many years, his name faded into the background, a story told quietly in black churches and veteran halls. But those who remembered him, those who needed to remember him, kept his spirit alive. In 1944, a destroyer escort was commissioned as USS Miller, DE 1091, the first Navy ship ever named after an African-American hero. It was a modest vessel, but to those who knew its namesake, it was sacred. In classrooms across the South, Black children recited his story with pride. Teachers spoke of the boy from Waco, who became a symbol for millions. And slowly, the legend of Dory Miller began to rise again. After the war, President Truman signed an executive order to desegregate the U.S. Armed Forces in 1948. The fight for civil rights was far from over. But the cracks in the wall of segregation had begun to widen. When people asked how it started, who proved that valor knew no race, many pointed back to that Sunday morning at Pearl Harbor, to a mess attendant who had manned a gun. In 1973, the Navy named a new frigate, USS Miller FF 1091. In his honor, carrying his name across the seas once more. And in 1991, a memorial was erected in Waco, Texas, featuring a bronze statue of Miller in uniform, his gaze fixed forward, steady, unyielding. For decades, veterans and families would come, laying wreaths beneath his likeness, but history had one final tribute waiting for him. On the 20th of January 2020, at a ceremony in Pearl Harbor, the U.S. Navy announced something unprecedented. A new Gerald R. Ford-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the most powerful warship ever built, would be named USS Doris Miller, CVN 81. For the first time in American history, a Navy aircraft carrier would bear the name of an African-American enlisted man. As the announcement was made, the crowd rose in a standing ovation. Among them were Miller's nieces and nephews, descendants of a sharecropper's son, who once polished silver aboard the West Virginia. The Secretary of the Navy spoke. Doris Miller stood for the best of who we are. He fought for his country even when his country didn't fully fight for him. The name Doris Miller now sails with the might of an entire nation, carried not just on steel and armor, but on the idea that courage can rise from anywhere. From a galley on the lower deck, from the son of a farmer, from a man who looked death in the eye and chose to fight back. Today, historians still debate how many planes Doris Miller actually shot down that morning. Some say 2, some say 4, but to the men who survived Pearl Harbor, the number never mattered. What mattered was that when the sky turned black and the harbor burned, he didn't hide. He stood his ground, grabbed a weapon he wasn't even trained to use, and defended his brothers in arms. That's what heroism looks like, not medals or parades, but instinct. Not permission, but courage. And in that single moment, when Doris Miller pulled the trigger, he shattered not only the enemy in the sky but the limits that others had placed upon him.